Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 16th episode of 2026. The gold sponsor for Fiber Breakfast is Condux. In Washington this week, Congress is in session, and there are several broadband deployment bills scheduled for consideration under suspension this week out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. So this signals strong bipartisan support and a faster path to passage. Last week, FBA signed on to a multi-association letter urging House leadership to advance H.R. 2289, the American Broadband Deployment Act, ABDA. This legislation includes provisions to establish a clearer, more predictable permitting timeline and contributes to the non-discriminatory treatment of broadband infrastructure and creates greater transparency around fees and processes at the state and local level. We expect the bill to move to the House floor for a vote in the near term. At the Department of Commerce, NTI has approved 53 of the 56 BEAD final proposals. 51 of the states and territories have signed their BEAD agreements with NTIA, unlocking their BEAD funding, allowing deployment to commence. The Fiber Broadband Association continues to advocate with NTI for clear guidance over the $20 billion plus in non-deployment funds. We're encouraging NTI to prioritize investments in permitting reform, a cleanup round to ensure universal connectivity, workforce development, and other uses to expand the impact of BEAD and fiber connectivity. We're now just 3.5 weeks, hard to believe, 3.5 weeks out from our annual Fiber Connect 2026 conference at the Gaylord Palms in Orlando on May 17th through 20th. Registration is on record pace as we are seeing a significant uptick in the number of network operators that will be planning to attend this year. So if you haven't registered, please go to our website and register today. You're not going to want to miss it. And last week on Five for Breakfast, our guest was Jeff Lopez, the director of the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion in New Mexico, who discussed smart funding, smart development, the strategy for driving 100% coverage. Mexico approaches 100% connectivity. Jeff's office is now focused on adoption and affordability. As a result, New Mexico has established a low-income telecommunications system program, creating a sustainable funding mechanism to support broadband access for tens of thousands of households, shifting affordability from a temporary federal benefit to a long-term state priority. If you missed last week's session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guests are Jaimie Lenderman and Alzbeta Fellenbaum from Omdia to discuss the latest trends and development in the North America broadband market. Jaimie is a research manager at Omdia. She leads a team of analysts and oversees intelligence services focused on optical, IP, and fixed access markets. Alzbeta is the practice leader for Omdia's service provider consumer research, covering consumer broadband data and building trends, as well as monetization strategies for telco digital retail services. So welcome, Jaimie and Alzbeta. And for our audience, please type in your questions to go and we'll work those into discussion. With that, I will turn things over to Jaimie.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. It's great to be back again on Fiber for Breakfast. Alzbeta and I are excited to talk about the latest trends in broadband in the US and Canada, and really what we're seeing for the future over the next several years. So really, I'd like to start with talking about the network deployment side of things moving forward, and then I will go ahead and pass over to Alzbeta to talk more about residential service trends. And so with that, this first slide really, just to showcase by 2030, we see that fiber-based subscriptions will reach parity with cable-based DOCSIS subscriptions by 2030. And so this is with regards to total fixed broadband subscription share. However, we do believe that if cable operators do pivot to FTTH deployments faster, this could accelerate the parity to be sooner than 2030. In tandem, however, we do continue to see the hockey stick deceleration of DSL. These subscribers that are either going to fiber in places where it's being rolled out to replace DSL, Or in many places where it hasn't, many subscribers we see are churning in favor of potentially an FWA subscription. And additionally, in some of the most rural dense, less dense scenarios where the business case for fiber continues to be uneconomical, so to speak, from a network build perspective, we are seeing success for satellite subscriptions in those areas. And so what is driving these fiber-based FTTH deployments? Well, it continues to be PON. It continues to drive them all across North America, the US and Canada. And so this figure on the right is our latest top-line forecast for what we see for PON shipments from OLT and ONT ports through 2031. And so you can see the OLT shipments are represented on the left axis, and the ONT, ONU port shipments are represented on the right axis. And with that being said, you can see there was a bit of a lull, a little bit of a drop in 2025. This is partially driven by consuming inventory by the operators, but also partially due to macroeconomic and geopolitical factors that I'm sure have been discussed in depth on this show many times. And so really moving forward, though, we do expect to see healthy year-on-year growth for the market moving forward. And so what does that look like? So for OLT ports, we expect there to be over a 14% CAGR, reaching 1.7 million ports by 2031. And then for ONT, ONU, ports, we still see a healthy growth, over 6% annually, reaching 12 million annually in 2031. So really what we see driving this is new deployments. And so even with revamped awards with BEAD, we still see the market for fiber deployments rolling out there. In addition, the question is when and how fast some of the larger MSOs will continue to roll out fiber. We do know they're rolling it out, but how quickly they might ramp in other markets. And then in addition is private equity, especially in this market in the US. And then additionally, what's also driving these port shipments are upgrades. So it's not to just support speed demands, but also advanced tiers and services, which Alzbeta will delve into. And then, really there's also thinking beyond the single family home. Many cases, these operators have passed MDUs, MTUs, and really, we'll get to it later sort of scenario. The question now is how do they connect those subscribers to FTTH? But also, is there a new business opportunity beyond residential? So where to expand the strategy if it works for enterprise as well as beyond? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And so right here, let's talk a minute about delivering 10G capabilities and beyond to the end user. So this figure shows two pie charts for 2025 and 2031, showing the split of 10G and higher ONT, ONU port shipments. So for 2025, as you can see, 10G is already the majority of shipments that are being sent to operators. However, by 2031, that will be the lion's share. This is different than other markets globally. That's because in many cases in North America, in order to connect users to higher speed connections and advanced services, many operators have chosen the price differential between deploying a 10G and higher ONT, ONU versus the cost differential and savings on a truck roll later down the road. And so of that 93% in 2031, one question we're getting a lot of questions about is that 25G and 50G PON. The end user devices of that 93%, 4% will be 25G and 50G PON. And so who are these end users? It's power users, but then it's going back to that non-residential applications. And then if we take a look sort of at our last slide, I know Brian Washburn showed this, our colleague, a few weeks ago on Fiber for Breakfast, but I just thought for the purposes of, why are operators continuing to deploy upgrades beyond just residential services, we would be remiss if we didn't spend a couple minutes talking about AI on our presentation as well. And so essentially what you have here is you have 3 different tiers of AI traffic. And so, just conventional traffic is the existing internet applications. These applications may use AI tools internally, but they do deliver AI-driven capabilities to others. And then we also have enhanced AI traffic. So this is traffic from today's applications that add AI features and capabilities on top. And then lastly, we have net new AI traffic. So traffic from applications that build with or enable AI. They range from simple to complex, really with AI as a part of their core functionality. And so you can see the hockey stick by 2035. And so really what I wanted to do today is, so with these PON networks, what do we see as the role for AI and the role of broadband networks for AI? And so we really do see a significant role, especially again, as this traffic demand continues to grow. We do believe that it's 2 different areas. So it's one, being a player from a network transmission side. So for example, being able to be at the edge to process data locally. However, we also see this network infrastructure as an opportunity as a partner to other players in the AI ecosystem. For example, in co-location space, with all the real estate assets that so many broadband network operators own and maintain. And so with that, we'd like to talk about the evolving landscape for residential broadband subscribers and the evolving service landscape. So with that, I will pass over to Alzbeta.
Thank you, Jaimie. And yes, we wanted to kind of give in our presentation, we wanted to give kind of a full view of the ecosystem from the network side to then kind of the consumer services side. And here we see kind of really the drive of high-speed gigabit subscriptions in the market, kind of growing in our forecast from about 1/3 of residential households subscribing to gigabit and higher services in 2025 to close to 60% in 2030. So really there is a demand for gigabit. All of the operators are offering it. It has become 1 gigabit service has become kind of the new mainstream that we see, and we kind of progressively see operators and service providers kind of going up the stack and offering higher and higher speeds. But with that kind of comes the risk of offering more and more speed for little to no increase in price, and kind of the risk of compromising revenue and ARPU going forward. Now, I have to say that the US and Canadian markets, they are quite resistant to this trend, but globally we really see the risk of cannibalization of the high speed, and particularly in the multi-gigabit sphere, we see kind of the risk of, for those services that should be the highest premium being really offered for close to none increase in price, and that can be a problem. And but so what can service providers do? How can they focus on more than speed and price? And there are some good news in our research that we see, and that is specifically when we talk to consumers and do our consumer surveys, we kind of see that speed and price, yes, they are still important for consumers. That's something that they look at, they take into consideration. It's speed is something that they've they understand. It's been kind of drilled into them that more speed means better service. But I think there's also been kind of a shift in mindset for consumers where reliability and good customer service really start to mean more for consumers, or it's something that they value more than speed and price. And we also see kind of last year was the first time when we've introduced a highly secure category for a broadband service. And that has kind of immediately jumped to number 2 in terms of how valuable these attributes are for consumers. So it's really the reliability, security, and customer service that matter. But what can be done in terms of monetizing these attributes? And we've kind of had a look, and here I have kind of an example or a mini case study that we've done looking at AT&T, where they've recently kind of introduced or rejigged their offering, looking at kind of tier structure of their broadband service offering, kind of keeping to the basic mid-tier and premium service based on speed. But you can also see kind of here how an additional value-added services are being offered and monetized further for additional revenue, whether it's kind of the advanced cybersecurity offering or premium Wi-Fi and mesh systems or advanced tech support. And you can kind of see how that kind of transitions through the individual tiers, where kind of the most premium multi-gigabit speed tier is really the premium one with the additional extra value-added services included already in price, but then also monetizing these services for the other service tiers and kind of getting additional revenue through that. And you can see on the chart kind of how that compares over the past year in terms of kind of increasing ARPU and ARPU growth compared when we look at AT&T compared to the rest of the US market. So that may be something to consider kind of when thinking about how to market services, how to change kind of the offering or tiers to consumers. And kind of looking even kind of further maybe into the future, or a trend that we start to see more often, both in the US, as we see the example of Jade, or elsewhere there's an example of BT there, and that is kind of offering highly kind of personalized offers. And we also ask service providers kind of what would they see kind of the use of AI in their kind of operations. And last year when we did the survey, using AI to determine customer patterns and usage patterns was the #1 kind of use case. And we think that we will kind of see, or we already see this, and we hope we'll see more of this in terms of kind of using AI to make services more personable and really making them relevant to consumers. So the case of BT, you see here, that's for new customers who want to sign up for a broadband service. There isn't talk of speed per se, but there is a question of what do you use your broadband service for? Is it for work from home? Is it for gaming? Is it for watching videos, entertainment? And then the next question is how many devices do you have in your house? And from those kind of simple questions, the consumer is then led to the most relevant plan. It's still speed-based, but there is more of a personal aspect. And then you can see the example of Jade, which I think it's a smaller provider based in Colorado, but I think it's quite interesting and quite a good example of how to get around the speed and price marketing kind of conundrum. This is what you see when you go to Jade's website. It's you immediately are drawn to the picture that you most likely identify with, whether it's a family or work from home. And Jade doesn't really market speed at all. They just really drive the consumer to the persona that that the consumer finds the most relevant. And then there are, additional services that are being offered on top of that. Cybersecurity is one of them. And it's quite an interesting take on how to offer broadband services in kind of, especially in the more saturated, the more developed markets get, the more competition grows, what can be done to kind of monetize and differentiate services further. So that's, I think, kind of like a maybe final point is thinking into the future, once the fiber network's built, once the infrastructure's there, how do you differentiate yourself, and how do you make consumers want to subscribe to your service? And personalization, in our opinion, I think it's going to be a big drive and big element of that differentiation going forward. So I'll stop there. I know we have some questions, and we can have some discussion. And now we have some time left. But thank you so much for having us.
Wow, this is a ton of information. Let's try to unpack a little bit. So if we can go to slide 7, Jaimie, you basically say, fiber is taking market share away from cable and other things. And it looks like even though due to the light regulatory touch for cable throughout the years, the fiber will take over market share. But you have this big pink area here, fixed wireless. And so, when I look at Alzbeta data, it says that subscribers will be moving to gigabit plus pretty quickly. What's that mean should we see this fixed wireless bubble burst at some time here in this horizon?
So I'm happy to take that, and then happy to pass it over to Alzbeta if she has anything to add. I really do believe that the profile of a fixed wireless access user tends to be slightly different than, say, your, fiber user. I will say anybody who is a heavy power user, especially on the upstream, will eventually move to fiber when it does become available. However, we have seen that, the FWA profile tends to be people who are more contract averse, maybe are more of, we use the word transient, so like maybe move around quite a bit. It's an easy connection for them maybe to add on to their mobile plan, or maybe just in an area where fiber is not available and the current, underlying technology is not suiting them enough. So I do think, we always will say if there is a fiber available, we don't foresee people churning from fiber to FWA. It's always, will be the other way around. But I do think we will see FWA level off. But however, I do think for the time being, I think there is a captivating business case for that, to be able to bundle that into your wireless subscription, mobile subscription, which I think, we're trying to see the MSOs are trying to capture on as well. However, we're seeing them, of course, add many mobile subscribers and churning many of their broadband subscribers. But on FWA, I can also hand it over to Alzbeta with anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think you've kind of captured it. It's certainly, FWA there is a business case for it, and you can kind of see in our chart that it's growing in the next several years, but then by 2030 the growth kind of stops, and that's because we do think that there's still going to be a business case for the more price sensitive and contract averse consumer. FWA is very easy to install and start using basically within minutes. So there is an element of that ease of connection, and price-wise, it's typically much cheaper, and there always will be a part of the consumers that will want kind of that ease and price of the service. So that is kind of not going to go down massively, I don't think. But again, we will see kind of the growth of fiber that will continue. And again, if we think about our consumer AI applications, are they going to proliferate? Are they going to need more bandwidth, particularly on the upstream? Well, then yes, we will see that those consumers that are on FWA and need that kind of additional bandwidth, they will likely turn to alternatives, and the alternative being fiber for the quality of experience that they will be looking at.
We have a ton of questions here, so let's hopefully can get some short answers. But so on the next slide, you're showing 10 gig, that we're going to be 93% 10 gig or higher. In London last week, a lot of people I talked to were looking to jump from over 25 gig to 50 gig PON. And I know that, it makes it a little bit complex if you have 25 gig and 50 gig of what ONTs you're going to use. Do you see in North America, we jumping straight to 50 gig PON, or do you see that we're going to hit the 25 gig PON and then do 50 later?
I think it really depends on where you're at now. I think especially the type of operator you are. I do think if right now you are, still in the process of upgrading, and I think it also depends on which vendor you're already sort of entrenched with as well. So I think there will be deployments of both, and there will continue to be deployments of both of 25 and 50 GPON in North America.
Okay. There's a ton of great questions from our audience. Like one is, Alzbeta, how do you help consumers understand how they're using their broadband? Many don't have any idea of all the devices that are connected to their network.
Yeah, so I think that definitely there needs to be some education to be done, but I think generally, consumers do understand that, they may not call it broadband, they will call it Wi-Fi, but they do know that they have to connect their devices to their Wi-Fi in order for them to work. So I think, helping, whether you're looking at that maybe questionnaire or the questions in terms of like the help to select the right service, I think maybe giving a bit more, information on what you mean by devices, I think that could help kind of explain like what do you mean by devices. So maybe telling them, well, it's not just your phone and your tablet, but it may be also your Ring or your smart fridge. So those may be kind of giving consumers a little bit of a hint of what we mean by devices. But I think there are ways that consumers are increasingly kind of attuned to, why their broadband, let's say Wi-Fi, does not work, or that when it doesn't work, and they tend to blame the service provider. They don't tend to, they don't really blame the device or the router manufacturer.
Well, yeah, just in the brief responses. So my provider, I have an app, and it tells me everything that's on and what's connected and what gets disconnected.
Yes, exactly.
One that came up last week when we were talking about network security, but this question is, do you see network slicing being used to deliver unique software to gateways and individual homes for more personalization, kind of leading to your example you had?
Yes, I think that is one way that we'll see kind of the personalization element to take hold. We're still trying to determine, is this part of kind of the B2C service and offering, or will it kind of shift into more of like the B2B to C? So when we're thinking like a slice for working from home applications, is that where kind of who is the one who's ultimately going to pay the bill? Is it the employer or is it the employee? But we do see it. So far, we've seen it for FWA more than the fixed networks. But Elisa in Finland, they do have a network slice on their 5G FWA service where it's like a stream for working from home applications, dedicated one, and that's monetized.
All right. Well, last question. Last question is, I wish I had more. There's a number of audience questions concerned about supply chain disruption, especially with huge demand for AI fiber infrastructure. How do you see that impacting your forecast?
Yeah, I think these are things that, we always try to say, like, we forecast, but we don't have crystal balls. And so, we've had to pivot our forecast, for example, on the reallocation of BEAD funds. That did, change some things. And so we are constantly taking a look at the macro conditions. But I think the underlying fundamentals, for supply chain, the demand is still there. It's just how and when it gets delivered. And so, yes, it is possible there could be a supply chain crunch, and that would stretch out our forecast longer.
All right. Well, you guys, we could spend all day. This is great information. Thanks for sharing that with our audience. And you guys are great guests. So I always love having you. Also, I look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. We're going to have our buddies, David Strauss and Jack Burton from BSP Technology Advisors, discuss the fiber network consolidation wave. Are you ready? And, I think you heard from Jim Stegman, we had 1,561 fiber providers now. So we are getting ready for a network consolidation wave. So it'll be really interesting to hear from David and Jack on how to prepare for that. Thanks, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you guys next week in Fiber Breakfast, and definitely in 3.5 weeks down in Orlando. It's coming so quick, and it's going to be epic. Best Fiber Connect ever. So see you there.